Patrice Lumumba, more than a martyr before he was an assassination, before he was a symbol, before he became a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of African politics, he was a farmer's son from Kasai province who taught himself 5 languages, read Voltaire by candlelight, and dared to believe that Africa deserved better. Somewhere between a headline and a hashtag, a man disappeared. Not just from life, but from memory, from the country he gave everything to build, from the history books his own children would study, from the streets that should have carried his name. His name was Patrice Mary Lumumba. He was 35 years old when they killed him, and this is the story they never finished telling. Part 1. The boy from Onaliwa. He was born on July 2, 1925 in Onaliwa, a small village in the Kasai province of the Belgian Congo. His birth name was Isitosambutowosa, and within his Tetela community he was known as Okitasombo, meaning heir of the cursed, a name that in hindsight feels almost prophetic. He was a farmer's son. The Congo he was born into did not belong to its people. It belonged to Belgium and had for decades carried the weight of one of the most brutal colonial histories on the continent. But from his earliest years, young Patrice refused to accept the world as it was given to him. He studied at Protestant and Catholic missionary schools and stood out not just for his intelligence but for his fearlessness. He would correct his teachers in front of the entire class not out of arrogance, but because he genuinely could. Not tolerate inaccuracy or injustice, however small. That quality would define every chapter of his life. Outside the classroom, he was reading Voltaire, Rousseau, Victor Hugo, and he was absorbing Enlightenment ideas about liberty and the dignity of man and quietly asking himself why those ideas seemed to stop at the borders of Africa. He wrote poetry, much of it quietly, defiantly anti-colonial, before he even had the platform to say so openly. He spoke 5 languages: Tetela, French, Lingala, Swahili, and Chiluba, in a country as vast and ethnically diverse as the Congo. That was not just impressive, it was political. It meant he could speak to almost anyone, across every tribal and regional line. That ability would become central to everything he tried to build, part to the awakening of a political mind. By his late 20s, Lumumba was working as a postal clerk in Stanleyville, but his mind was working on something much larger. He was 27 years old when he became regional head of a political circle and began moving seriously in intellectual and organizational spaces. He was 30 when he joined the Liberal Party of Belgium and began editing and distributing political literature, studying power from the inside in order to eventually challenge it. In 1958, at just 33 years old, he co-founded the Mouvement National Congolais, the MINC. What made this party radical was its founding principle. Unlike almost every other political formation emerging in the Congo at the time, the MINC deliberately refused to be built on ethnic or tribal identity. Lumumba insisted it belong to all Congolese people regardless of where they came from. In a political landscape already fracturing along tribal lines where other leaders were building power bases from their own communities, this was visionary. It was also dangerous to those who preferred a Congo divided against itself. A united Congo was harder to control, and there were many powerful interests who needed the Congo controllable. That same year, he traveled to Accra, Ghana, to attend the All-African People's Conference hosted by Kwame Nkrumah. The two men recognized something in each other immediately. Nkrumah was personally struck by Lumumba's intelligence and conviction. For Lumumba, standing in that room with Pan-African leaders from across the continent confirmed everything he believed, that Africa's liberation had to be collective, not fragmented country by country, not tribe by tribe, together. He returned to the Congo a more determined man than when he left. He was 33 years old. Part 3, the price of conviction. But conviction in colonial Africa came at a price that was extracted quickly and without mercy. In late 1959, at 34 years old, Lumumba was arrested and accused of inciting an anti-colonial riot in Stanleyville. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison. Here is where the story reveals its first great complexity. The very day his trial began, January 18, 1960, was also the first day of the Congolese Round Table Conference in Brussels, where the future of the Congo was being negotiated at the highest levels. The delegates in Brussels refused to proceed without him. The pressure was so intense that Lumumba was released from prison and flown directly to Belgium to participate. That's it for a moment. A man imprisoned by the colonial system was considered so indispensable to the conversation about that system's end that they had to free him to continue the conversation. That was the measure of Patrice Lumumba's political standing at 34 years old. The conference concluded with a historic declaration. The Congo would become independent on June 30, 1960. Heart for Independence and its fractures, the Minkwana plurality in the May 1960 elections. On June 24, 1960, Patrice Lumumba became the first Prime Minister of an independent Democratic Republic of the Congo. He was 34 years old, but even before independence was formally declared, the cracks were already showing. And this is the part of the story that is rarely told because it is uncomfortable, because it implicates not just the colonizers but the colonized. Even within Lumumba's own political world, the infighting was fierce and damaging. Members of his own coalition were already engaged in the politics of the stomach, more concerned with securing ministerial positions, personal advantage, and tribal representation than with the integrity of the new nation they were supposedly building. Independence had not yet been declared, and already some were asking not what can I build, but what can I get? Lumumba navigated these competing interests with extraordinary skill for a man his age, but the fractures weakened him at the very moment he needed to be strongest. Then came the independence ceremony itself. King Baudouin of Belgium delivered a speech that praised Belgian colonialism as a civilizing gift to the Congolese people. Every official Congolese response prepared for that day was polite and diplomatic. Then Lumumba stepped forward unscheduled, unscripted, and spoke directly to his people. He described the humiliations of colonialism plainly and without apology. He told the Congolese people that their independence was not a gift. It was something they had fought for, bled for, and earned through decades of suffering and resistance. The speech shocked the Belgians and Western powers seated in that room. It electrified the African world. He was 34 years old, and that speech was also the moment many of the most powerful forces in the world decided that Patrice Lumumba could not be allowed to lead. Part 5: The betrayal. Within weeks of independence, the Congo was unraveling. A mutiny broke out in the army. The mineral-rich Katanga province, backed by Belgium. Mining interests worth billions declared secession. The country Lumumba had just been entrusted to lead was being pulled apart from within and without simultaneously. He appealed to the United Nations for military assistance to restore order. The response was inadequate. In desperation, not ideology, he turned to the Soviet Union for logistical support. He needed aircraft. He needed help. He was trying to hold a nation together with his bare hands. That single decision handed Western powers, particularly the United States and Belgium, the justification they had been waiting for. In the paranoia of the Cold War, any reach toward the Soviets was enough to mark a leader as an enemy to be eliminated rather than a statesman to be engaged. The CIA began actively plotting his removal. Belgium was deeply involved. His own head of state, President Kasavubu, dismissed him from office in September 1960. Joseph Mobutu, the army chief Lumumba had trusted, staged a coup. Lumumba was now a prime minister without a government, hunted in his own country. He attempted to travel to Stanleyville, where his supporters had established a resistance government. He gathered a small group and began the dangerous journey. And here is the detail that must be told, the detail that reveals not the politician but the man. Along the way, Lumumba stopped. He went back, not for power, not for documents or strategy. He went back for his wife, Pauline, and their young son. He could not leave them behind. His love for his family in that moment made him vulnerable in a way that all his political enemies combined had never managed to. He was captured on that road, beaten, publicly humiliated, transferred to Katanga, where his enemies held absolute power, tortured, and on January 17, 1961, Patrice Mary Lumumba was executed. He was 35 years old. His body was dissolved in acid so that nothing would remain. A Belgian officer kept his tooth as a trophy. Belgium would not formally apologize for its role until 2002. His tooth was only returned to his family in 2022, 61 years after his death. Part 6: The erasure. What happened after his death is its own tragedy, and it is the part that should make every African deeply uncomfortable. Mobutu, the man who betrayed him, went on to rule the Congo for 32 years under the renamed State of Zaire. During those 3 decades, Mobutu systematically erased Lumumba from Congolese national memory. Streets were renamed, history books were rewritten. The man who had given everything for Congolese sovereignty was made a ghost, in his own country by the very person who helped destroy him. The politics of the stomach that had weakened Lumumba's coalition in 1960 did not disappear after his death. They flourished. They were institutionalized. They became the architecture of Mobutu's kleptocratic state, a 32-year lesson in exactly what Lumumba had tried to prevent. Look at the Congo today. Look at many corners of Africa today. The infighting, the self-enrichment, the betrayal of public trust. The leaders who arrive with the language of liberation and leave with the contents of the national treasury. These patterns did not begin recently. They were present in the very first days of independence. 60 years ago, when men who should have been building a nation were already calculating what they could take from it. That 60-year gap between then and now is not a gap at all. It is a continuum, and understanding Lumumba fully, honestly, without reducing him to a martyrdom poster is one way to begin understanding how we arrived where we are. Closing the call, Patrice Lumumba corrected his teachers at 10. He was writing anti-colonial poetry in his teens. He was building a national political movement at 33. He was prime minister at 34. He was dead at 35. In those 35 years, he taught himself 5 languages, read the great philosophers of human liberty, built the first truly non-tribal political party in Congolese history, delivered one of the most consequential speeches ever given on African soil, and died on a dirt road going back for the people he loved. He was not a perfect man. His government had fractures. His judgments were sometimes costly, but he was a man of extraordinary courage, extraordinary vision, and extraordinary integrity in a world that punished all 3. His story is not just history. It is a question directed at every young African alive today. When it is your turn, and it will be your turn, will you be a Lumumba, or will you be one of the others? Honor his legacy, learn his full story, and then go and build something worthy of the price he paid. People are more than headlines. Their stories deserve to be fully told. This has been African Untold Narratives.